Well, welcome to the Cut for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Clay. I'm joined by Eric Stearns. I want to apologize for our 2-week gap there. I had a funeral, and then last week I spent some time down in Kansas City at Church of the Resurrection for a leadership institute. But glad to be back. And today, Eric and I are going to dig into my sermon from Sunday, which was all about the dreams of the wine steward and the baker in Pharaoh's house, and just how Joseph was willing to give an interpretation, even though it had no guarantee of working out for him. And so just, how do we react in the similar circumstances, and just how can we grow in our faith here in this story? So let's get into it.
Sounds good. Are we too early in the Joseph story? Because I've reread, tell you what, I reread Genesis.
That a guy.
It's a whole shit show. I'm telling you. Like the whole book. I'm like, Jacob's dad is kind of messed up, but this is who we're all supposed to, he becomes Israel. It's kind of a mess, right?
Uh-huh. Yes.
And I know there's Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, the musical, but this could be, this whole story could be a blockbuster movie that's rated R, and you would just think it's coming from a movie.
Yeah.
And so, like 2 weeks ago, your sermon was on Joseph's run-in with Potiphar's wife, right?
Yep.
She just wants him, for lack of a better term. She wants to do the deeds.
Yep.
And
she very much does, and will stop at nothing.
Essentially, yeah. And so if this is a Hollywood movie today, you've got some hot naked chick laying on, you know what I mean? I mean, that has to be what it is, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And
he has the fortitude to turn her down.
Yeah.
How is that not a movie?
It's pretty much made for TV, or made for Hollywood, or made for some kind of,
Definitely not TV.
Yeah, maybe, definitely not TV. Yep.
This is definitely a streaming. If it's a TV show, it's a streaming show.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Not on CBS.
No.
You know what I mean? But
it's not even ready for prime time, man.
Right, exactly. Well, and I don't know. We always have in our heads that the Bible is, clean and not offensive. You know what I mean? Like maybe outside looking in, or just when you look at everything superficially, you don't think about what's actually happening. Because I've read Genesis before, and it never really hit me like it did this time. This is really just deep, kind of dirty stuff,
Yeah.
And first of all, as Christians, what do we do with that, other than we understand that we're all, just the same then as we are now. They were people, and had the same desires that we do.
Yep.
And for Joseph to be able to say no to that is quite impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and to say no to that, and then to literally flee, when he finds himself in this it's almost uncomfortable to talk about how bad of a situation he found himself in. He was alone with her. She had orchestrated this. She had manipulated the situation to the point where he is alone with her, and has to leave behind his own clothing to get away from her. Yeah, it's bizarro land. And in our modern times, and I'm not being critical, but in our modern times, this type of a story would not get made. That's why this isn't a movie, is because this kind of a story is not made. It's sexual assault is what happens.
Exactly.
Joseph gets sexually assaulted by this woman, and then falsely accused of sexually assaulting her. But because it's he said, she said, and because in that culture, she's the wife of Potiphar. Potiphar is a big deal. So you're going to believe this important Egyptian woman over this unimportant Hebrew man. And so it doesn't matter what Joseph says, it would not have gone well for him. And like I said on Sunday, tying it back to the Potiphar's wife story, the only reason why Joseph is not dead, which is what should have happened, by the way, Joseph should have been straight up murder one, because he tried to rape Potiphar's wife. Like, Potiphar should not have responded in grace in the way that he did. It's only because Potiphar liked him. Or Potiphar liked what Joseph brought to the table, and that was godliness, and God putting success behind Joseph because he was godly. Like, that's the only reason why he doesn't die, is because he was turning a profit.
Yeah. I don't know. The skeptic in me is always like, yeah, Potiphar probably knew his wife was crazy. It was like, no, he probably didn't do this if I can't kill him for it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yep. Or Potiphar knew that his wife was, attracted to more than just, well, yeah, just trying to figure out how to say that, but thanks.
No problem.
But yeah, no, the entire story of Scripture, like, there are, if you really dig into some of the stories, there are some seedy things that happen in the Bible. Like, not least of which is JL, driving a tent peg through a guy's head in order to defend her country. Like, there are a lot of unseemly things, unsightly things. I have an entire youth study book called Gross, Scary, Weird Stories in the Bible. And like, it's one of my favorite things to teach. Because there are just such bizarro cuckoo stories that happen in the story of Scripture that we want to gloss over them so badly, but yet there still is a nugget of God's truth in the midst of all of those stories. Like Joseph, like in the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, like Joseph turned it right back to godliness. Joseph is like, I'm not going to betray my master and more Potiphar. And more than that, I'm not going to betray my God. I'm not going to sin against my God just for, sex with you. Like, that's not on the list of things I'm going to do. Like, there's no way, that's this physical desire that you are expressing towards me is not worth my integrity. And so, like I was talking about in the sermon, like, we are tempted by things that would take us outside of our own integrity all of the time. And, do we have that same resolve? Do we have that same gumption that Joseph had to remove ourselves from situations, to really, sometimes it takes fleeing. Sometimes it takes, I'm not going to have this, I'm not going to have access to this after, XYZ time, or, whatever it is, it's just, yeah, there are things that we can do to safeguard our hearts and safeguard ourselves from falling into sin.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But talk about an example for us to be able to have the integrity and the self-discipline to say no. Hopefully I'm never in that situation.
Right.
But man, I hope I say no to, you know what I mean? Like until you're in there, you don't know how you're going to react, but you got to think you're going to do the same thing as Joseph. But it's, at some point, you don't, maybe mute this, you don't think with the same head at that point.
Correct.
But you know what I mean? Like,
yep. Like,
that takes it for an unmarried man. Well, and especially at that time when they had 6 wives,
exactly,
like, it was a
whole
different world than it is today too.
Yep.
It just, Joseph is one impressive dude.
I agree. That's why we're doing a sermon series on him.
At what point are you, if you're a fan of Joseph, what point are you like, man, where's your self-preservation? Because every single time or earthly self-preservation, I should say, like, he never cares about what the earthly consequence is going to be.
Right.
Like, he gets thrown in, I don't know. It just, like on Sunday when he's telling, or interpreting the dreams of those 2 guys, you almost wonder when he told the bartender, essentially, what his dream meant in hand, don't forget about me. Like,
yeah,
he was going to throw him under the bus, didn't he? I don't know. What do you think?
He does make an earnest plea. He does, like, timing wise, Sunday got away from us. Let's just be honest about where we are. And so like there was a part of that chapter that I did not read, Genesis chapter 40. And that is where Joseph like pleads with the guy, hey, I'll tell you this, but you gotta help me out, man. You can't forget me. You can't leave me here because, you know, the dream says you're getting out, man. So when you get out, help a brother out. Because, you know, I could have just told you anything you wanted to hear. I could have told you lies. I told you the absolute truth of what your dream meant. Don't forget me. And then, you know, I'm sure in the back of his mind, he had to have known it was an option. It was possible. I mean, he is an outsider of the outsiders. He is a Hebrew person. He is, you know, falsely accused, but they don't know that. All they know is that they're down here because that he's down there because he, you know, tried to hook up with Potiphar's wife, which, you know, is not the real story, but what we don't know what they knew, you know. So it would be very in that situation where Joseph has none of the power and none of the privilege and none of the standing. Yeah, I mean, Potiphar could have been, I mean, probably was going around saying, oh, that Joseph guy, I trusted him and put him in charge of all this stuff. And he turned around and tried to sleep with my wife. Like, that could be the story. That could be the prevailing narrative, you know? And so they get these two other guys get down there and, you know, I don't know how enthused they were that Joseph was a part of their story. And so then one of them died and one of them got out and didn't think of him again for 2 years until Pharaoh found himself in a similar situation.
But time and time again, he doesn't change.
Yeah. Yep.
He just keeps doing the things that we should strive to be able to do. You know, he's not worried about his current status.
No. Not at all. And it's because he has those dreams in the back of his head the entire time. Like he, you know, in a culture that believes that, you know, God is the one that gives dreams and that the dreams that God gives are, you know, predictive of what's going to happen. You know, he believes with all of his heart that God's going to be, even in the midst of everything else, he believes that these dreams are going to come, or that these dreams are going to come true. And, you know, that's just, I'm much more willing to give up on my dreams than he is. Those dreams are very powerful and really what power forward the entire narrative of him becoming the shining star and the most impressive sheaf of wheat, you know, which he does. I mean, he becomes the second most influential person in the entirety of Egypt. He compels, or not compels, but he lives in such a way that his brothers, you know, move up, they pick up everything and they move to Egypt at the end of the story, you know, and then a lot of their entire nation follows. Becomes a problem, you know, a couple more hundred years down the line, it becomes a problem, but.
You hear cool stories about frogs and locusts and all sorts of turning blood and all that kind of stuff. So,
yep.
Story for a different day.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, it's how the Exodus happens. I mean, it's how salvation. It's just such a part of salvation history. This entire story, it just fits in. You know, it connects the pieces between how does God promise Abraham generations before that they're going to rule in Canaan and, you know, live in a land flowing with milk and honey. And then they leave and then they come back. Like it's, you know, it's this bizarre world that, you know, that this is all a part of God's story.
I don't know. I've been enjoying rereading Genesis. Probably not a podcast really, but yeah, like it's a freaking mess. And like I don't know. I can't get over like, hey, go to your brother's house and steal yourself a wife from one of his daughters, and like the incest is just, yeah, we need to do that. I know it's a culture thing, but it's weird.
It is. When people think of Genesis, they think of like the creation story and then maybe Lot's wife, maybe Sodom and Gomorrah, maybe, you know, maybe some of Jacob, but, you know, Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff in there. I love the book of Genesis. So when I was in seminary, I had to take an Old Testament elective, and my Old Testament elective was on Genesis. So spent a lot of time in this book in seminary.
Would love to take that class, or at least I don't ever want to go back to college, but you know what I mean? You know what I mean, though? Like, it's just fascinating. And I would love to get more of the understanding of the culture at the time. Like, you can kind of pick that up as you read through it, but it'd be nice to be able to add some context a little bit to it.
That's why commentaries are a thing.
Mm-hmm. So 2 more weeks of this
2 more
series?
weeks. Yep.
What do we have for next?
The story is about to get better. I've talked about a couple of times in the last couple of weeks of, like, if you're in church with us, don't get your hopes up, because the story's not going to get any better. And finally, it's going to, because we're going to get into Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh has this fitful night of sleep and has this dream about, 7 fat calves and then 7 skinny calves. And he's just like, well, that's weird. I don't know what that means. And so he asks his best and his brightest to come and help interpret the dream. And none of them can. They're just like, well, we don't know. I don't know. And then the wine steward, the bartender, that, as Eric pointed out, says, hey, I was in jail once. I don't know if y'all know that, but I was in jail once. It was 2 years ago, but there was a guy down there that really, he was able to interpret my weird dream. Maybe he'll be able to interpret your weird dream, and so Joseph is called in front of Pharaoh, hears the dream, and then just says, hey, here's what's going to happen. 7 years of better crops, 7 years of famine. How are we going to navigate it? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to stock up in those 7 years. We're going to be, fiscally responsible. We're going to be conservative with our consumption. And then for 7 years of the famine, it won't be that big of a deal because we've done the hard work of storing up. And Pharaoh's like, all right, cool. I need someone to be in charge of that. I need someone with a real good head on their shoulders that can be in charge of that. And it's like, well, obviously it's Joseph. And so Joseph, with the wisdom that God granted him, is able to help the people navigate through. What we're going to do with that is talk about how there are with our confirmation kids. Like, they've been on this long journey of growing in their faith and growing in godly wisdom, but it's not really the end. It's just beginning, because, Joseph's story, it feels like this could be just the end. Like, he helps Pharaoh navigate, and then, Pharaoh says, all right, cool. We have the plan. Peace out, Cub Scout, back down to jail. But through this, he's given an opportunity to continue to grow in godly wisdom and to continue to live out his faith, his faithfulness before God. And that's the same opportunity that's afforded to us. It's not just one moment that makes our entire life of faith. It's not just the confirmation moment. It's not just our baptism. It's not just, seminary graduation. It is an ongoing, lifelong process of becoming who God has made us to be. And so as my confirmands take this big step in their faith, it's not over. As Joseph's story starts to evolve and change, it's not the end of the story. There's still a lot of things happening that he'll have to help navigate through the years of, this 14-year cycle that he's going to be in charge for. So yeah, we just can't bank our entire faith on this one event. We have to continue to live and grow in our faithfulness to God.
Mm-hmm.
So,
sweet.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it should be good.
Thanks for joining us on this week's Cut for Time podcast. Join us again next week in person at 10 a.m. at church, online on Facebook Live. We're back here for the podcast next week.
Thanks for listening to our Cut for Time conversation. Join us for worship in person or on Facebook Live Sundays at 10 o'clock Central Time. And now go in peace and serve the Lord.